Welcome back to the Real News Network and the Reality Asserts Itself. I'm Paul Jay. We're continuing our series of discussions with Sabah and Alnasseri. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
So we left off in the last part.
Right.
Saddam Hussein's just coming to power.
Right.
You're 17 years old.
Yeah.
You're in high school in Basra.
Right.
So talk about the coming to power of Saddam, how it affected your family,
Right.
and how it affected the country.
Right. I mean, the first thing is my older brother was a communist, so he was arrested and he was, incarcerated. A lot of communists fled the country, went to Moscow or Syria or Europe, etc. And then all of a sudden, after this opening in the 1970s...
Can I just stop for 1 second?
Yeah.
Because, we're in the United States, and here, communist is the boogeyman,
Yeah.
and all they want to do is, take everything you own and throw you in jail and kill you if you wink.
Right.
What did the communists in Syria want? What did their political program look like?
In Iraq?
In Iraq.
In Iraq. Well, the Communist Party, as I said, had enormous, support within the Iraqi population, across different segments of the Iraqi population. And programmatically, they settled in the 1970s contra the 1950s and 60s, which was much more anti-capitalist, not only anti-imperialist, but much more anti-capitalist, working class, base-oriented party. They settled in the 1970s for this National Front / social democratic type of policies like welfare state with the Ba'athist. So there was transformation taking place within the Communist Party for a much more radical anti-capitalist to a left liberal leaning type of a party. And maybe there were some...
But the anti-capitalist meant what? Like workers' ownership? Things like this?
Well, as I said, they abandoned this anymore. They settled for higher wages, social security for the working class, pension and benefits and all that, right?
So by the 70s, it's not that much different than European social democratic parties.
Exactly. And the most radical part of the Communist Party, already in the 60s, left the party and created their own so-called Communist Party. In Kurdistan, there's a Communist Party, the so-called the military wing or something like that. And so they were fracturing within the Communist Party against the leadership of the Communist Party. So in the 70s, again, as I said, this party settled for this welfare state with the Ba'athist. And it was not mad, in effect, because, as I said, we as working class kids, and I used to live in one of the most impoverished working class neighborhoods in Basra in Iraq. We benefit from this opening and this alliance between the two materially. Like all of a sudden, school were for free, books were for free, clothes were free, you get clothes and everything. Before you couldn't even afford like buying pencils and pens and so on. Now you get everything for free.
And this was paid for by the oil revenues.
Yes, absolutely. The healthcare was for free.
And this is a result of the nationalization of oil.
Yes, because all of a sudden Iraq has access to this enormous, revenue of the oil, especially after 1973 with the oil crisis. The oil prices skyrocketed at that time. So all of a sudden Iraq has enormous, potential in pursuing national developmental strategy, like industrialization, analphabetization, all these things. And they achieved, relatively in this period of time, more than they actually intended to, or maybe they wished for. So Iraq, by the end of the 70s, was one of the most developed countries in the Middle East. And I remember they received a lot of, awards from the United Nations for, let's say, a literacy campaign against mass diseases, against all that.
Now, this is all before Saddam.
Before Saddam.
So in 79, Saddam comes to power. How does that happen, and what's the attitude of the Americans to that?
Well, what Saddam did is once his uncle, al-Bakr, was in France, he was sick, he pushed against his uncle and within the party and declared that he is now the minister president of Iraq. And al-Bakr is sick, he cannot continue as a president. And he, like al-Bakr, actually delegated all his power to Saddam Hussein, which is not true. Because I think even al-Bakr, his uncle, did not trust Saddam Hussein. And he was not that, right-wing leaned figure like Saddam Hussein. But I think Saddam Hussein also, was supported by the Gulf monarchies at that time and the US against Iran, because the shift in Iran, with the revolution in Iran, the Gulf monarchies feared now there will be an export of the revolution, and especially the Shiite population in the Gulf will side with Iran. This will destabilize the whole Gulf region. So Saddam Hussein was the figure that was supported by the Soviet Union, by the US and Gulf monarchies against Iran.
Soviet Union, Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, yes.
I think you said Soviet Union.
And the Soviet Union, yes.
Supported Saddam.
Yeah, against the revolution in Iran, because they were Islamists and so on. And they were, again, they were dragged into later in a war in Afghanistan because of the Mujahideen. And they were supporting the Hezbollah, the communist government in Afghanistan, the Soviet Union. So they feared this Islamic revolution and so on. So everybody was supporting Saddam Hussein. And they sacrificed, again, their own allies, the Communist Party, for that matter. So what happens is, it's not only you have people like my brother, ending in a prison and so on, but, and that's one of my memories as a high school kid, all of a sudden, after this opening, where you can go in Basra and, and enter the Communist Party's offices and bureaus openly, read the newspaper, it was much more open, political atmosphere. In 1979, everything was shut down. So much that even reading or carrying Marxist literature is illegal. So one of my memories is at that time was there were a few copies of, let's say, Lenin, What's to be Done, for instance. So you have 4 or 5 copies in the whole province of Basra. And you have people now carrying these 4 or 5 copies illegally. They cover it with kitchen cover or whatever. But the interesting thing about them, once I saw one of these books, and I think what is to be done, and I must say, at that time, I still was not too much into this Communist Party rigid way of understanding Marxism and so on. But I sympathized with them because of my father and my brother and so on. So I used to get the books from the communists. So the interesting thing about them, you have one copy carried by maybe 10,000 of people illegally. They have to carry them. So you can see, when you carry a book illegally, you are scared, you start sweating. So you can see the fingerprints on these copies, right? You can select 1,000 of them on these copies. So it's interesting to see, the history of these illegal transport and whatever texts and books on the cover of the book, right? So that really stuck to my mind, this moment. The second one, where I actually became politicized, contra my own attention, because I hated to see my brother every 6 months in prison and then out in prison. I thought, I don't want this life. It sucks. so what happens is,
because of his political activity.
Yeah, of course. So what happens is, one of my friends at that time, one day I went to his house to pick him up from his house. His father told me, his name was Khaldun. He told me Khaldun died. He had cancer. I said, I just saw Khaldun 3 days ago. And then he realized, I'm a good friend of Khaldun. He said, come inside Sabah. So I went to the room of Khaldun, and I saw he used to paint a lot of comics against the Ba'ath Party. Like one of them, the peasant plant and the Ba'ath Party still were there. So a lot of beautiful comics, critique on the Ba'ath Party and so on. And he said, one of his friends, alleged friends, one day came to visit him, and he saw this. And then he told the intelligence, the mukhabarat, about him. So he said they came and they picked him, and he was executed. And he was my age, right?
17.
Yeah, so that's what I thought. Okay, I thought if you are apolitical, if you don't, mix with Communist Party or Dawa Party, you're still safe. But I realized at that moment, no. If you like it or not, you will be politicized. You will be pushed to that. So that was like a awakening moment in my life, where I became much more conscious about the political situation at that time. And then we sensed, I remember that we had a lot of debate and discussion, of course illegally, that there's something will happen soon, and especially vis-a-vis Iran. So we feared at that time that Saddam Hussein will attack Iran. There was a push. You can see this in the 1980, in the run-up to the attack on Iran in September 1980. Speech of Saddam Hussein was given about how the Shiite in Iran tried to infiltrate the Shiite in Iraq. And they start, arresting 1,000 and 10,000 of Iraqi family, accusing them of being some sort of Iranian because their families come 300 years ago to Iraq, but actually they are not Iraqis, and that they're throwing them out from the country to the border to Iran, similar to what happens in 1939 in the U.S. against the Japanese community. The same thing. So we see all these things going on in front of our eyes, and we sense that there's something going to happen vis-a-vis Iran. We sense that might lead to a war. And it happens, like in September 1980.
With the Americans backing Saddam,
yes.
There's this famous picture of Rumsfeld together with Saddam.
Right. Later, they delivered the chemical weapon with which he attacked the Kurds and the Iranian, right? So we sense that this is going to a war. And Saddam Hussein, underestimated the potential of the Iranian population. He thought after the revolution, the military apparatus was destroyed. They don't have generals, they don't have officers. These mullah have no clue about the war. So it will be easy march into Iran, occupy the oil field, especially at the border of Iraq where you have this Arabic community. At that time, maybe today, I'm not sure, where, discriminated against, marginalized in Iran. So it would be easy to win the support of these communities at the border and occupy the oil fields. But he underestimated Iranian nationalism, and then he stuck in Iran until 1988. The problem is, whatever the Baathists and the communists have achieved in the 1970s was destroyed in the 1980s because of the war.
The social safety net, all
right.
Free
well,
education.
The social safety net stays. That's the interesting thing. You still had the social safety net until 2003, and you still had the same constitution and your rights, like for work, pension, and so on. And that's the interesting thing about it. Not even Saddam Hussein, dared to change something of the constitution, because the Baathists, even his own cliques, insisted on these things. So, and for me, it was interesting to see the first thing the United States did in Iraq with the support of its allies, the Shiite party. The first thing they did when they introduced the new constitution, the first thing they get rid of was the social rights of the Iraqi people. All these rights you had before were dismantled from the constitution, right? And the whole document reads like anti-terror text rather than a constitution on the one hand, on the other, a manifesto for privatization, right? So that's the interesting thing, that on a cultural, ideological, political level, you can say Saddam Hussein and his clique were extremely reactionaries, etc. But at the socio-economic level, right, and so on, they still sustain these welfare states and safety.
Which had come before him.
Yeah.
But to undo it would have been extremely
Yes.
unpopular.
Right. Like until 2003, the Iraqi population, because of this murderous sanctions from 1990 to 2003, you don't have access to anything. So the state used to distribute food and so on, ratios to the Iraqi population. You have 32 items on your card. You get rice, sugar, tea, whatever you need for free from the state. So that's the other thing. These so-called Shiite party in the U.S., they get rid of that. People don't have any, cards anymore.
Saddam comes to power.
Yeah.
Some say the CIA helped ease the process.
Yeah.
In any rate, he is essentially an American ally. He's an American ally in the attacks on Iran.
They supported him.
So how does he become the enemy of United States? And during this whole period, oil remains nationalized.
Yes. So until 2003, but actually until today, it's still nationalized. They couldn't privatize it anyway. But what happens?
We're going to get to that.
Yeah.
But how does Saddam become the big enemy?
Yeah. What happens? You can say it's a historical coincidence. It was not planned. After 1988, when the Iraq-Iran war ends, Iraq had enormous debt, and especially mostly to the Gulf states. And so the Iraqi were trying to renegotiate this debt, and they were saying, you know what, we did this war, among other things, to protect you. So this is not really a debt. This is your funding and so on. The other Gulf countries, the Saudis and so on, they were mostly okay with it. But the Kuwaitis insisted on their debts. And they insisted on the debt in 1989, pressured by the Bush Sr., not to settle for an agreement with the Iraqi, escalate the conflict with the Iraqis. Why? Because I think in 1989, 1990, the time of the breakdown of the Soviet Union, that's the moment where the U.S. felt it is time to have a physical presence in the Gulf region, not just having some whatever ships in the Gulf, but have military bases all over the Gulf region. So they wanted to escalate the conflict with Iraq. They knew that the Saddam Hussein, with his nationalist, militarist mindset, and with this enormous debt against Iraq, and there was rebellion within the army against Saddam Hussein, fighting for 8 years for a war that didn't serve any interests of the Iraqi people. So he was in a crisis. So they knew the only way out for Saddam Hussein is to create a new war, to engage Iraq in a new war. And in this case, the escalation of the conflict with the Kuwaitis was part of the scenario.
So they helped suck him into...
Exactly, drag Iraq into the new war.
And there's the story of the American ambassador
all this fabrication,
going to Saddam and saying, if you go after Kuwait, there won't be any big repercussions.
Right. The same fabrication, just like the weapon of mass destruction in 2003, the same lies. And so then you have this situation where the United States, for the first time, since the Second World War, they have the capacity to have military bases in Saudi Arabia, all over the place. They didn't have this before, and nobody dared, even these Gulf monarchies, to have physical military presence of U.S. military bases in their countries, fearing that their population would be against it. And it's rightly so, because there was a lot of resistance against it. Bin Laden at that time, for instance, he told the Saudi king, you don't need the American troops to come to Saudi Arabia. I can mobilize fighters as many as you want, and we can kick out the Iraqis from Kuwait, right? Here you have disagreement between the U.S., the Saudi, and Bin Laden after they were an ally, and you have also, the disagreement between the U.S. and Saddam Hussein, who used to be the allies. But now the U.S. needed these opportunities, to have a physical presence in the region. That's why Saddam all of a sudden became the absolute evil. Bin Laden became the absolute evil, and so on. So it was a historical coincidence. Like if the Soviet Union, let's say, did not break down in 1989-90, we wouldn't know what would have happened or which way things would have gone, right? So it was mostly a historical coincidence. And you can still see this in 1991 when the United States, did settle for Saddam Hussein again. And they had an agreement with him, right? And because when they saw there was a spontaneous rebellion against Saddam Hussein in March 1991, mostly...
Shia rebellion. Mostly.
It was not Shia, that's the point. That's the interesting thing. What happens is the first, the soldiers who came back from Kuwait, they were kicked out from Kuwait. The first thing they did, once they entered Basra, this is, the province at the border of Kuwait. Once they enter the city, they start shooting at this portrait of Saddam Hussein spontaneously because they were outraged. They had 8 wars with Iran for nothing. Now again, a war against Kuwait for nothing. So they were so outraged, they start shooting. And all of a sudden, all the people, men, women, kids, everybody went spontaneous on the street and start, rebelling against Saddam Hussein. And this rebellion spread in no time in other provinces of Iraq. What happens is, and that's the most tragic moment of this spontaneous rebellion of the people. You have all of a sudden some conservative Shiite forces and militias coming from Iran, especially Al-Badr and the so-called the Revolutionary Council, the Supreme Revolutionary Council, coming from Iran and trying to give the whole revolts a Shiite sectarian clothing, right? So what they did, start massacring Ba'athists, killing Ba'athists. Didn't happen before. Like people didn't kill I don't know, traffic police because it was Ba'athists. So they start massacring Ba'athists and start making sectarian thing. That's what the United States felt, what, this is going too much. That would be Iran de facto. If they win, Iran would be in Iraq. So we settled for Saddam Hussein. So again, they negotiated
to save Saddam.
And then contra to the agreement they had with Saddam Hussein, that Iraq shouldn't use its heavy weapons and air power. They allowed Saddam Hussein to use the air power
Against the rebellion.
against the rebellion, right? So that was one tragic moment at that time, where you have the tendency there, especially from Al-Dawa, Shiite party, to sectarianize politics in Iraq. It didn't work. It worked in 2003 with the Bush administration.
All right. In the next segment of our interview, we're going to continue this discussion with Sabah Alnasseri and pick up again, sort of intertwining where he was in all this, and his father and brother. And we're going to get up to this, again, fight over, of course, Iraqi oil. Please join us for the next segment of Reality Asserts Itself.